There's a shot from one of their videos, Zach and Becky rolling across an open field in their tractor, heading out to watch the sunset together. No crowds, no cameras pointed at them, just two people and all that Minnesota sky. It's the kind of image that makes people in the comments say things like relationship goals and mean it. But here's what people don't think about when they see that shot. Behind every one of those sunset moments was a version of this couple that was being pulled in completely different directions. By money pressure, by questions about identity, by a workload split that would have quietly destroyed most partnerships before they even noticed it happening. Zach and Becky Johnson look like a team now, and they are, but getting there took a lot more than most people realize, and it started with a disagreement at the very beginning that almost meant the whole thing never got off the ground at all. Zach Johnson grew up on the family farm outside of Lowry, Minnesota. Corn and soybean country, flat land and cold winters, and a way of life that his family had been living since his great-great-grandfather came over from Sweden in 1876 and homesteaded the land they still work today. He graduated high school in 2003, went to a trade school in Bemidji for automotive mechanics, and then looked around at his options and decided the farm was where he wanted to be. Not because it was glamorous, it's never been that, but because it was his, and he loved it, and that was reason enough. Becky wasn't from Lowry. She grew up in a neighboring town, and the two of them crossed paths in high school the way people do in small-town Minnesota, a world where everybody knows everybody, and the towns are close enough that you end up at the same Friday night events. They got together, they stayed together, and in 2007 they got married. Both of them had grown up without much. As Becky herself would later put it, we both grew up poor in rural Minnesota. That shared starting point matters a lot more to understanding this story than people might think. For the first several years of their marriage, life followed a pretty straightforward pattern. Zach farmed with his dad Nate on what would eventually grow to over 2,400 acres. Becky ran a daycare out of their home, raising kids and building her own thing while Zach worked the land. They lived in the farmhouse where Zach grew up. 3 kids came along, Onyx, Rhiannon, and Isla. They also eventually adopted Becky's niece Aurora, who was a teenager at the time. It was a full house, a full life, and if you'd asked either of them in 2015 where they'd be in 5 years, neither one would have said anything close to what actually happened. In the spring of 2016, Zach started noticing something that bothered him. People around him, neighbors, relatives, friends, were talking about farming in ways that were just wrong. The debates about GMOs, about how crops were grown, about what farmers actually did on their land, a lot of it was based on misunderstanding, and Zach knew it. He wasn't an angry guy about it, but it got under his skin. So he picked up his phone one afternoon in the farmyard and made a YouTube video. It took him about 15 minutes from the time he decided to do it to having it uploaded. That was the first video on what would become the Millennial Farmer channel. For most of that first year, nothing much happened. He kept filming. Views were modest. It was a side project, something he did alongside everything else. Then in the fall of 2017, the tractor stuck in the mud video hit, and seemingly overnight, thousands of people were watching. The channel started climbing. People were tuning in from all over the country, from all over the world, watching a guy in West Central Minnesota do his job. Something about it just connected. That's when Becky saw something Zach didn't. She looked at what was happening with the numbers and told him this wasn't just a hobby anymore, this was an opportunity, a real one. And if they were serious about it, they needed to treat it like a business. Zach's response, by his own admission, was skepticism. He didn't really take it seriously at first. He didn't fully understand what it meant to build a brand on YouTube, and frankly, he didn't know if he wanted to. He was a farmer. That was the whole point. He was already stretched thin managing the land, the equipment, the daily grind of an operation that never really clocks out. The last thing he needed was to also become some kind of internet personality. Becky kept pushing, and eventually Zach listened. But here's what that decision actually cost her, because this is the part of the story that tends to get glossed over. When the channel started growing seriously, Becky didn't just become a supportive presence in the background. She became the engine. While Zach was the face on camera, Becky took on the advertising, the accounting, the social media management, the sponsorship emails, the speaking tour logistics, the video editing, every single bit of it. She taught herself new editing techniques constantly, watching tutorial videos just about every day to keep up with what the channel needed. And she did this while also being a mother to 4 kids in a farmhouse where the work was always right outside the front door. At the same time, she walked away from her daycare work entirely. She gave up her own career, her own identity outside of the farm, to go full-time on a channel that Zach had only just barely been convinced was worth doing. That's a significant thing to ask of someone, even if it isn't asked directly. She bet on his reluctant idea harder than he did. She restructured her entire life around it before he was even sure he believed in it himself. And while the channel kept growing, while Zach's subscriber count climbed and his face became recognizable at farm shows and ag expos across the country, Becky stayed largely invisible to the audience. She was Mrs. Millennial Farmer in the comments, appreciated in an abstract way, occasionally glimpsed in videos, but the fame and the recognition landed almost entirely on Zach. The person doing half the work, arguably the harder half, was running the operation from behind the curtain. That kind of imbalance doesn't announce itself. It builds slowly. And in partnerships, especially ones where two people are also living together, farming together, and raising a family in the same physical space, it can become a very quiet source of damage if nobody talks about it. Then 2018 hit. Farming in Minnesota took a hard turn that year. Crop prices were rough. The conditions weren't good. The farm, which had been doing reasonably well up to that point, ran into losses, real ones. And for the first time, Zach said something out loud that would have been unthinkable a couple of years earlier. The YouTube money was what helped them offset those losses. The channel had gone from a side project to a lifeline. That shift changes things in a relationship. When your backup plan becomes your main plan, the pressure attached to it multiplies. Suddenly, every video matters differently. Every sponsorship deal, every algorithm tweak, every shift in viewer numbers carries a weight it didn't used to have. Becky acknowledged this directly. The possibility that YouTube could change its algorithm overnight and wipe out what they'd built was something she held in the back of her mind. It wasn't paranoia, it was a legitimate reality of their financial situation. By 2019, Zach was openly saying that the Millennial Farmer brand was generating at least 5 times more income than the actual farming, which should have felt like a win, and in some ways it was. But it also meant that the version of himself he had built his whole identity around, the farmer who farms because that's what farmers do and that's who they are, was now financially secondary to the version of himself he'd never planned to be, a content creator. That tension wasn't just professional, it went deeper than that. Zach has talked publicly about what this felt like, and he didn't dress it up. He described genuinely struggling with his own sense of who he was. On one hand, farming was his identity, not just a job, but something passed down through generations of his family on land that had been in their name for nearly 150 years. On the other hand, he was spending just as much time, sometimes more, in what he called the social media world. Filming, planning content, managing the public-facing version of himself that millions of strangers had come to know. His own words on it, "I kind of struggle with the idea that I am a farmer, that's what I am, that's what I want to be, that's what I hope to be forever." But in reality, we spend just as much or more time in the social media world. I'm trying to figure out how to balance that exactly. That's not a small thing. A man who doesn't know who he is anymore isn't easy to be around, even for someone who loves him. Identity crises don't stay contained to the person having them. They spill over. They make people distant, distracted, or restless in ways that don't always have an obvious explanation. And when that's happening inside a home where you're also the business partner, the co-parent, and the person editing all the videos, it creates a kind of pressure that doesn't have a clean outlet. What also doesn't get talked about enough is the specific difficulty of working with your spouse every single day without any separation between the job and the rest of your life. Most people, when work gets stressful, go home. The commute, even if it's only 20 minutes, is a decompression valve. You walk through a different door. You're in a different space. The farm doesn't offer that. Zach and Becky wake up in the same house, walk out the same front door, do their work in the same space, and come back inside at the end of the day without ever having left. There's no version of leaving it at the office when the office is literally the yard. Add a YouTube channel to that, where the audience expects content, the sponsors expect deliverables, and the pressure to keep growing never really lets up, and you've got a situation where two people are never fully off the clock. The camera follows them, the comments follow them. The sponsorship emails are waiting at the kitchen table. The stress of a bad farming season or a video that underperforms doesn't stay in one lane, it bleeds into everything. Most couples that try to build what the Johnsons built, a working farm plus a media operation plus a nonprofit plus a family with 4 kids, don't make it through all of that intact. The ones who do aren't just lucky. They've figured out something specific about how to function together under that kind of sustained pressure. So what is it that actually held them together through all of this? Part of it comes back to where they started, Two people who grew up poor in the same corner of rural Minnesota, who understand on a bone-deep level what it means to work hard and not have much, don't rattle as easily as people who've never known that kind of baseline. They weren't building a lifestyle brand from a place of comfort. They were building something real out of necessity, and that gives you a different relationship to the grind. Part of it is that despite the imbalance in visibility, they genuinely divided responsibilities in a way that played to their actual strengths. Zach is the face, the personality, the voice. He's authentic on camera in a way that can't be faked and can't be manufactured. Becky is the business. She's the one who spotted the opportunity, who pushed when Zach held back, who built the operational infrastructure that turned a phone video into a brand with over 1 million subscribers and more than 300 million lifetime views. They're not competing for the same lane. They're running in different lanes toward the same destination. And then there's what they built beyond the channel itself. The Grain Bin Safety Campaign, which eventually became their nonprofit Harvest Outreach, raised over $100,000 for fire departments across the region to purchase rescue equipment. In 2022, Zach started volunteering directly with Farm Rescue, going out to help farmers who were in crisis and couldn't work their land. These weren't promotional moves. They were expressions of what the Johnsons actually care about, and doing that kind of work together, work that matters and has nothing to do with subscriber counts, creates a kind of foundation that the day-to-day pressures can't erode. Zach put it well when talking about what he justifies the YouTube income with. He said that both he and Becky had put enormous amounts of work into what they built, that they deserved to be compensated for their time, and that if people were willing to pay them for what they created, it meant he could continue being a bigger voice for agriculture. That's not the logic of someone chasing fame. That's the logic of someone who needed a reason to keep going and found one that he could actually live with. That sunset tractor shot, Zach and Becky out in the field, just the two of them, makes a lot more sense when you know everything that went into getting there. It wasn't two people who had it easy finding each other and coasting on good luck. It was two people who disagreed at the start, who split the labor in ways that weren't always visible or fair, who went through a year where the farm bled money and the internet was the only thing keeping them afloat, who had to watch one of them have a public identity crisis while the other kept the whole operation running from behind the scenes. They got there the hard way. The thing about couples who almost drift apart is that you don't usually know it's happening until you're already further gone than you realized. What the Johnsons had, and what probably saved them, was the combination of shared roots, genuine complementary strengths, and a reason for doing all of it that was bigger than just the numbers. They weren't doing this to become famous. They were doing it because Zach believed farming deserved to be understood, and Becky believed in Zach enough to quit her career for an idea he wasn't even fully sold on himself. The sunset tractor shot is real, but so is everything that almost prevented it.